They called her a rookie nurse. 2 months on the floor. A fresh badge. The kind of person you overlook without trying. And yet, on the day Houston locked itself behind police barricades and protest lines, she performed 7 surgeries in 2 hours. Then watched the hospital go quiet, like it had just witnessed something it wasn't built to understand. Inside Lone Star Regional, the air smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and the waiting room felt like every modern pressure cooker you've ever lived through. Phones buzzing, monitors screaming, people begging for time they don't have. The chief surgeon was trapped outside, and 7 lives were sliding toward the edge. If you stay, you'll see what happens when protocol collapses and one trained set of hands becomes the only difference. Hit like and comment where you're watching from. The pressure you felt in that waiting room was not abstract. It had a sound, a smell, a weight that settled on the tongue. It was the buzz of phones that never stopped. The sharp bite of disinfectant layered over burnt coffee. The soft, constant hum of a building that stayed alive by refusing to rest. By sunrise, Houston already looked wrong. Not apocalyptic, not cinematic from a distance, just blocked. The kind of blocked that turns a normal commute into a trap. Police barricades cut across feeder roads. Patrol lights flashed against storefront windows. Crowds gathered in thick knots at intersections holding signs chanting in waves that rose and fell like heat. Traffic apps went red in every direction, then stopped updating entirely, like the system couldn't admit the city had become unmovable. Inside Lone Star Regional Trauma Center, glass walls offered a view of flashing lights and slow-moving people. From the outside, the hospital looked like it always did, a tower of steel and reflective windows. From the inside, it felt like a bunker with a front door that the world had decided to push on all at once. The security supervisor stood near the main entrance with a radio pressed to his mouth, listening to updates that came in clipped phrases. "Stay locked down. No one in without clearance." A patient's family tried to argue with him. A woman in a puffer coat with hair still wet from a rushed shower. Her hands shook as she held up a phone screen showing a text thread that never answered. "My brother is in the ICU," she said. "I left for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The supervisor's face tightened. He hated being the wall. He hated the way people looked at him when he said no. He looked past her toward the double doors as if the right answer might appear on the other side. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We're not letting anyone through until we know it's safe." Safe. The word meant nothing to her. She wiped tears from her cheeks with the heel of her palm and stepped back, defeated but not calm. She hovered near the entrance anyway, because hovering felt like doing something. On the 3rd floor, administrators crowded into a conference room with a wall-mounted screen showing a city traffic map. Every major artery around the hospital glowed red. Not rush hour red. Total red, the color of a system that had stopped pretending it could move. A man in a suit tapped the table with his knuckle impatience disguised as urgency. "Where is Dr. Rowe?" The trauma coordinator, a compact woman with a no-nonsense haircut and a headset slung around her neck, didn't sit. She paced eyes, never leaving her phone. "He is trying 3 different routes," she said. "He is not getting through." A younger administrator frowned. "Can he come by helicopter?" "We do not have air clearance," the coordinator replied. "Police have the airspace tied up." A pause fell heavy with the kind of silence that forms when no one wants to say what the data already said. 7 operating rooms existed in that building. Hundreds of staff. A trauma designation printed on banners and brochures. Yet the system still revolved around one person's arrival when things went wrong. Downstairs in the emergency department, Emma Vaughn worked a routine triage shift as if the city had not tightened into a fist. She stood at a workstation just off the nurse's station, scanning vitals on a tablet. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun that didn't allow even a single loose strand. Her expression was unreadable in a way that made people assume she was shy or new or simply tired. She was new, 2 months on staff, which meant she was still learning names and shortcuts and unwritten rules. It also meant most people talked around her as if she were furniture. Not cruelly most of the time, just automatically. People didn't notice the steady ones until steadiness made them feel exposed. Emma's rookie badge hung from her scrubs like a neon sign. Someone in HR had thought it was a good idea. A way to encourage mentoring, they said. A way to set expectations. In practice, it made every conversation begin with a slight reduction in trust. She had learned to accept that without protest. A senior nurse named Cynthia Hale moved down the line of bays, checking on staffing assignments. Cynthia had the kind of competence that didn't need kindness to function. She had survived too many shifts and too many tragedies to waste her tone on softness. She stopped at Emma's station and glanced at the board. Cynthia said, "You are transport support today. You will move patients. You will not run trauma." Emma nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Cynthia studied her for a beat, eyes narrowing slightly. "And you will stop watching people work like you are taking notes," Cynthia added. Emma's gaze didn't shift. "I'm just paying attention." Cynthia's mouth tightened. "Pay attention to your lane." She moved on. Emma returned to her tablet, fingers tapping with quiet precision. She recorded vitals. She updated the queue. She answered the same questions over and over as patients leaned toward the desk, with the particular impatience of people who believed their discomfort was the center of the universe. "How long is the wait? Can't you just get a doctor to look at me? I called an ambulance. They said to come here. Why is it taking so long?" Emma's voice stayed calm. It never rose. It never sharpened. She spoke in short, clear sentences and didn't offer apologies that would invite arguments. In the waiting room, the television played news coverage of the protest. A reporter stood in front of a line of officers in riot gear. The camera panned to a crowd, then to a man yelling, then away quickly when someone shoved toward the lens. Patients watched with the bored fascination of people trapped in public spaces. Others stared at their phones, doom-scrolling, absorbing the city's anxiety, while their own pulse kept time in their wrists. The hospital's internal alert system chimed softly every 20 minutes, updating staff about lockdown status. Lockdown level orange, limited access. Lockdown level orange, limited access. It became background noise, like the hum of the fluorescent lights. Emma moved between tasks with the kind of efficiency that made coworkers forget she was new. She refilled glove dispensers. She checked crash carts. She replaced an empty oxygen tank in Bay 6 without being asked. She wiped down a monitor with thoroughness that bordered on ritual. No one thanked her. No one needed to. She wasn't doing it for praise. She was doing it because gaps were dangerous. A resident named Mark Dalton brushed past her near the medication room, nearly knocking a tray out of her hands. "Sorry," he said without looking back. Emma adjusted her grip. "You're fine." Dalton was already talking to another resident voice, loud enough for Emma to hear. "This whole city is locked down, and somehow my shift is still happening," he said. "Like the universe doesn't understand I have plans." The other resident laughed. Emma didn't. At 9:42 a.m., a charge nurse from the surgical wing walked through the emergency department toward administration, face tight with restrained panic. Her badge swung against her coat as she moved too fast. Emma watched her pass. Something about the gait registered. Not medical. Operational. The walk of someone carrying news that would shift everyone's posture in seconds. Emma's phone vibrated once in her pocket. She ignored it. The hospital policy was strict about personal devices during shift hours, and Emma had no interest in being noticed for the wrong reasons. The phone vibrated again. She slid her hand into her pocket and checked the screen without lifting it, shielding the motion from the open hallway. A message from an unknown number. "Stay in your lane." Emma stared for one breath. Her thumb hovered, then her screen dimmed. She didn't respond. She didn't even delete it. She locked her phone and returned to work. Her face didn't change, but her shoulders tightened as if someone had just hooked a rope to her spine and pulled. She pushed the sensation down. A bad habit of memory. A coincidence. Spam. A wrong number. She told herself those things like a checklist. At 10:15 a.m., an ambulance arrived with a patient from a minor car accident. Not the kind of case that made the hospital famous. A man with a broken wrist and bruised ribs, angry at everyone and embarrassed to be hurt. Emma helped transfer him to a bed and listened as he complained about the protest. This is what happens when nobody controls anything, he said, voice rising. People don't realize there are consequences. A nurse replied politely. Sir, try to keep your arm still. Emma moved the blood pressure cuff into place and watched the monitor. The rhythm was normal. The numbers were stable. She kept her attention on the patient's breathing anyway. Not because she expected disaster, but because her eyes always tracked the first signs of it. The man noticed. What are you staring at? He snapped. Emma looked at him with calm neutrality. I'm making sure you're okay. He scoffed. You're a doctor. I'm a nurse, she said. He rolled his eyes. Then get a doctor. Emma turned away without answering. Behind her, another nurse named Tasha leaned in and whispered amused. Welcome to trauma care, Tasha said. Emma's mouth twitched with something that wasn't quite a smile. I've met worse, she said quietly. Tasha laughed. Where? Summer camp. Emma didn't answer. She adjusted the patient's IV and walked away. The line between who she was and who she pretended to be was thin, but she kept it intact with discipline and silence. At 11:03 a.m., a hospital administrator came down to the emergency department in a tailored blazer and shoes that had never seen bodily fluids. Her smile was fixed, the kind meant for donors and press conferences. She spoke to Cynthia at the nurse's station, voice low but frantic. Legal says we need incident readiness, the administrator said. If something happens and Dr. Rowe isn't here, our exposure is enormous. Cynthia didn't look impressed. People bleeding out is exposure. The administrator's smile tightened. You know what I mean. Cynthia gestured toward the waiting room, the crowd of patients, the ambulance bay beyond. This is a hospital, Cynthia said. Something is always happening. The administrator leaned closer. Not like this. The city is unstable. If we get a major incident while our leadership is stuck outside the perimeter, we need chain of command clarified. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Clarify it now then. The administrator opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, they had not clarified it because clarifying meant admitting vulnerability. Emma listened while she pretended to chart. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The words were enough. Chain of command, liability, exposure. It was the language of people who survived by paperwork while others survived by blood loss. At 11:47 a.m., the cafeteria sent up a tray of sandwiches for staff, a small attempt at normalcy. The smell drifted through the nurses' station. People grabbed food quickly, eating standing up, chewing while they talked, never stopping long enough to feel hunger properly. Emma took a sandwich and sat on a stool near the wall, facing the hallway back straight. She ate without taste, eyes scanning. Her brain ran the environment the way it always did. Exits, bottlenecks, equipment locations, personnel distribution. She noticed 2 security guards repositioned near the main entrance. She noticed a trauma tech replace a box of chest seals in the supply cabinet. She noticed the anesthesiologist on call had not come down to check in. She finished half the sandwich and threw the rest away. Tasha looked at her. You hate turkey. Emma shrugged. It's food. Cynthia walked by and glanced at Emma's untouched cup of coffee. You don't drink coffee, Cynthia said. Emma didn't look up. It makes my hands shake. Cynthia paused for half a second, as if the comment landed in an unexpected place. Your hands don't shake? Cynthia said. Emma's eyes flicked up briefly, then back down. Not today. Cynthia moved on, but her gaze lingered a fraction longer than before. At 12:22 p.m., the hospital's internal message board flashed a new update. Lockdown level red. All external entrances sealed. The waiting room murmured. A few people stood and approached the desk to ask questions. What does that mean? Can I leave? Is it safe? Emma answered as calmly as she could. It means the hospital is limiting access, she said. If you need to leave, you can, but re-entry may not be possible. A man with a toddler in his arms frowned. We live 10 minutes away. Emma met his gaze. Right now, the city isn't operating on 10 minutes. He stared at her, then nodded slowly, understanding without wanting to. At 12:56 p.m., a trauma pager beeped not with a code, but with an alert. Surgical team delayed. Traffic blocked. No ETA. The message traveled through staff like a cold draft. In the trauma tower, the OR charge nurse stood by the surgical board with her arms crossed, tight eyes on the doors. She checked her watch again. The board showed 7 rooms available, staffed ready. a machine waiting for its operator. In the emergency department, Cynthia gathered the nurses briefly. "No one panics," Cynthia said. "We do our jobs. We follow protocol." Her eyes moved over the group, landing on Emma for a beat. "And we do not go rogue," Cynthia added. A resident snorted, "Like we could." Emma's face remained neutral, but the words scraped. Going rogue was what people called it when someone acted without permission. In other places, under other lights, it had been called decisive action. It had been called survival. It had been called the only option that existed. Emma kept her gaze down and let her breathing slow. In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. It was a familiar rhythm, one she had learned to control nausea and fear and the adrenaline spike that made the world sharpen too much. A nurse beside her whispered, "You okay?" Emma nodded, "Fine." At 1:18 p.m., a new patient arrived. A teenager with a knife wound to the thigh, not life-threatening, but messy blood soaking through his jeans. He sat in triage, trying to look tough while his mother cried. Emma knelt to apply pressure, hands firm and calm. "You're going to be okay," she said. The teenager's eyes flicked to her face. "It hurts." "I know," Emma said. "But you're still here. Stay with me." The phrase came out before she could stop it. The mother looked up sharply. "What?" Emma adjusted her grip. "Just breathe." The mother nodded, tears still falling, clinging to the word, "Okay," like it was a lifeline. Emma finished the pressure dressing and walked away quickly, feeling the phrase echo in her own head. Stay with me. It belonged to a different place, a different time. She had promised it too many times to too many people. At 1:46 p.m., she checked her phone again in the medication room where the cameras didn't reach the corners. Another unknown number. "Do not be visible." Emma stared at the screen. Her pulse stayed steady, but her mouth went dry. She deleted the message this time. Not because deleting would stop it, because leaving it felt like consent. She slid her phone back into her pocket and returned to the floor. In the hallway, Mark Dalton, the resident, was arguing with a paramedic about a transfer. "We don't have space," Dalton said, voice sharp. The paramedic's eyes flashed. "You have space. You have beds. You have a trauma tower. You just don't want more work." Dalton's face reddened. "You don't get to talk to me like that." Emma walked past them carrying a box of saline. She kept going, but her ears registered the way the paramedic's knuckles were white on the gurney handle. The way Dalton's stance was defensive, not strong. The way the tension in the air was building like static. The city's pressure was leaking into the hospital, and the hospital was not designed to absorb it forever. At 2:07 p.m., Cynthia pulled Emma aside near the supply closet. "You've been quiet," Cynthia said. "Quieter than usual." Emma blinked. "I'm always quiet." Cynthia's gaze sharpened. "Not like this. You're watching the doors." Emma kept her expression neutral. "We're locked down." Cynthia leaned closer. "You have a habit of looking like you're waiting for something to hit." Emma's jaw tightened, then released. "Maybe I'm just tired." Cynthia studied her. "Where did you work before this?" Emma's voice stayed even. "Out of state." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "Where?" Emma held the pause. "North Carolina." Cynthia nodded slowly, not satisfied, but not pushing. "You have a weird way of holding your coffee cup," she said, suddenly changing direction. Emma glanced down at the empty cup she had been carrying without noticing. Cynthia demonstrated with her own hand. "Most people hold it like this. You hold it like you're bracing for movement." Emma's fingers tightened around the cup. "Habit," Cynthia exhaled. "You keep your head down." "That's fine. But don't keep it down so far you miss what's in front of you." Emma met her gaze. For a moment, the room narrowed. Cynthia wasn't accusing her. Cynthia was testing her, trying to determine what kind of person she was under strain. Emma said, "I won't miss it." Cynthia's eyes held hers. "Good." She walked away. Emma stood still for a beat, then threw the coffee cup away and returned to the nurse's station. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Her mind had shifted into a quieter, sharper mode. At 2:39 p.m., the trauma coordinator called down from upstairs, voice tight. "Be advised, we are preparing the OR wing for potential mass intake. No confirmation yet." Cynthia nodded into the phone, then hung up. The nurse's station went quieter. People stopped joking. Someone turned the waiting room TV down. Even the patients seemed to sense a change they couldn't name, like animals sensing a storm. Emma looked at the board. The ER was busy but not overwhelmed. Yet. She checked the crash cart again, then checked it again, then forced herself to stop because repetition could become compulsion if she let it. Tasha noticed. "You're doing that thing again." Emma glanced at her. "What thing?" Tasha shrugged. "Counting. Like you're trying to make order appear by staring at supplies." Emma's mouth tightened. "It helps." Tasha softened. "Hey, it's a weird day. The whole city is weird." Emma nodded once. At 3:11 p.m., a text came from a number Emma recognized not personally but by pattern. A number that never used punctuation. A number that always spoke like an order. "You are making noise." Emma stared at it. Her thumb hovered. She didn't respond. She didn't delete it. She just stared until the letters stopped feeling like words and started feeling like a threat. Then she locked the screen and put the phone away. She turned to the board and forced her attention back to the living in front of her. A man with asthma waiting for a nebulizer. A child with a fever who had been crying for 2 hours straight. An elderly woman with chest tightness being evaluated for a cardiac event. These were the people Emma had chosen. The ones in fluorescent light, not red light. The ones in a system with forms and protocols and a cafeteria. The ones who felt safe compared to the places she had come from. She had built a life around that safety, fragile and strict, like a bandage placed over a wound you refuse to examine. At 3:27 p.m., the external protest noise surged. Chants rose louder, closer. Someone shouted into a megaphone. Police radios crackled. The security supervisor hurried past the nurses' station with 2 additional officers behind him. Cynthia watched them go. "Keep the doors locked," she called after them. The supervisor didn't look back. "They are." Emma looked at Cynthia. "Are we expecting trouble inside?" Cynthia's mouth tightened. "Trouble is outside. We just keep it there." Emma nodded slowly. She didn't say what she was thinking because it sounded like paranoia. Trouble had a way of finding doors. At 3:44 p.m., the trauma coordinator called again, voice substrained. "Dr. Rowe is still not through. No route, no air clearance." Cynthia closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. "Who's the attending in-house?" Cynthia asked. The coordinator's answer came with a delay that felt like a warning. "There is no attending surgeon physically present." Cynthia's jaw clenched. "Who is covering?" The coordinator exhaled audibly. "We have residents. We have fellows. We have anesthesia. But the authority is still Rowe." Cynthia set the phone down slowly. She looked around the emergency department, eyes scanning faces, counting strength. Emma met her gaze. Cynthia held it for a beat, then looked away. Emma didn't know whether Cynthia trusted her or feared her, but she knew Cynthia was doing the same math Emma was doing. How long could they hold without the anchor of leadership? At 4:08 p.m., a nurse in Bay 4 called out, "We need respiratory." A patient's oxygen saturation had dropped unexpectedly. A simple case turned sharp. Emma moved without being asked, adjusting the patient's position, checking the tubing, calling respiratory with a calm that steadied the room. The patient stabilized. The bay returned to its ordinary noise, but Emma felt the adrenaline surge anyway. Not panic, readiness. Her hands stayed steady because she forced them to. Afterward, Dalton, the resident, watched her with a faint frown. "You're weirdly calm," he said. Emma glanced at him. "It helps." Dalton snorted. "When you're new, calm usually means you don't get it." Emma's eyes held his for a beat. "Or it means I get it." Dalton stared, then scoffed and walked away uncomfortable with a rookie who didn't perform insecurity on cue. At 4:36 p.m., Emma stepped into the staff bathroom and locked herself into a stall. Not to cry, not to panic, to breathe, to reset. She rested her forehead against the cool metal divider and counted. In, hold, out. The hospital felt smaller today, not physically, psychologically. Like the walls were closer, the air thicker, the city pressing inward. She remembered different walls, different air. She didn't let herself stay on the memory. She stood, washed her hands, and returned to the floor. At 4:58 p.m., Cynthia called the staff to attention again, voice low but firm. We are in lockdown, Cynthia said. If something comes in, we move clean. No noise, no wandering. You go where you're assigned and you stay there. Her eyes moved over the group, then stopped on Emma. Cynthia said. You stay near OR transport. You are not to enter a room without instruction. Emma nodded. Yes, ma'am. Cynthia held her gaze longer this time. Do you understand? Emma's voice was quiet. I understand. Cynthia looked away, but her shoulders stayed tense. She didn't like the feeling of a system that depended on luck. At 5:17 p.m., the emergency department took a collective exhale as a lull hit. Not calm, just fewer arrivals for a short stretch. Staff used the moment to catch up on charting. Some sat down for the first time in hours. A nurse stretched her back and winced. Emma didn't sit. She restocked a tray. She aligned supplies. She checked the airway card again. Tasha watched her and shook her head. You're going to work yourself into the ground, Tasha said. Emma didn't look up. Better than stopping. Tasha's expression softened. You can stop for a minute. Emma's hands paused. A thin line of tension ran through her shoulders. No, she said quietly. Not today. Tasha started to reply, then held back. People learned quickly that Emma's boundaries were quiet but unmovable. At 5:49 p.m., the hospital's internal radio crackled with a short burst of static that raised hairs on the back of Emma's neck. Not because the static meant something, because it sounded like the start of a message that could reshape the entire building. Cynthia reached for the radio but didn't speak yet. She listened, eyes narrowed. The radio stayed silent, a false start, the kind that made everyone's nerves tighten for no reason. Emma stared at the trauma bay doors, then forced herself to look away. She was not waiting for the world to collapse. She was doing her job. At 6:12 p.m., the traffic feed updated on the nurse's station screen. A cluster of red lines became darker, thicker. A small icon blinked at an intersection near the freeway. Cynthia muttered. That's not good. Emma leaned slightly just enough to see. A bus symbol. A collision indicator. A timestamp. Cynthia's hand went to the radio again. The emergency department didn't know yet. Not fully. But the city was about to push 7 lives toward them at once, and the building's sense of normal had already started to peel away. Emma felt her breathing slow without effort. Her vision sharpened. Her hands stopped moving and then resumed with more precision. She didn't want this. She didn't want the moment that would force her to become visible. She didn't want anyone to look at her hands and realize they did not belong to a rookie. But wanting had never been the thing that mattered when a clock started running. The radio crackled again louder this time. And this time the voice came through clear enough to cut. Mass casualty incident dispatch said, City bus versus multiple vehicles on I-45. 7 critical. ETA 6 minutes. Cynthia's face changed instantly, every line tightening into command. All right, she said, voice rising. Everyone move, clear bays, call anesthesia, call blood bank, or transport on standby. Emma was already standing, already moving to the supply cabinet, already checking gloves and gauze and chest kits with a speed that looked like efficiency and felt like a memory waking up. Her rookie badge swung against her scrubs as she walked, and the hospital's clock started bleeding seconds into the air. The announcement hit the department like a blunt object. 6 minutes sounded generous to anyone outside medicine. Inside it was nothing. 6 minutes was the time it took for blood pressure to fall off a cliff. 6 minutes was the space between a salvageable airway and a closed one. 6 minutes was the distance between a decision and regret. Cynthia Hale moved, first voice sharp and controlled. Clear bay 1 through 4. Tasha, pull trauma packs. Dalton, get your team in here now. Call respiratory. Call radiology and tell them we are about to flood them. People scattered. Shoes squeaked on linoleum. Drawer cabinets slammed and reopened again. Someone shouted for a gurney. Someone else ran for warm blankets because shock loved cold floors. Emma moved toward the supply cabinet without being told. Her hands opened. It pulled out chest seals, tourniquets, pressure dressings. She laid them out on a rolling cart in neat lines, not because neatness mattered, but because her mind needed the objects to be where her fingers would reach without looking. Cynthia glanced at her, once then looked away. Emma could not tell if Cynthia approved or didn't want to start a conversation she could not finish. A paramedic voice came through the radio, broken by static. We have multiple ejections. 7 critical. 1 pediatric. At least 2 with suspected internal hemorrhage. 1 with compromised airway. Cynthia's jaw tightened. She pressed the radio closer. Any incoming codes? A pause, then the paramedic again. 2 peri-arrest. 1 unstable chest trauma. We are doing compressions now. We are 4 minutes out. Cynthia lowered the radio slowly, as if keeping it level might keep the patient's level too. She turned toward the nurse's station. All right, we triage hard. We treat what we can. We do not get stuck on one patient. Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on every face. When she looked at Emma, it lasted half a beat longer. Emma held her gaze. She didn't nod. She didn't offer anything that would draw attention. She simply stood ready. Dalton, the resident, arrived with 2 interns behind him, faces young and too pale. He had the inflated urgency of someone who believed loudness was leadership. Where are they? 3 minutes, Cynthia said. Get your airway equipment ready. You take pediatric. Dalton blinked. Me. Cynthia's voice stayed flat. Yes. You. You want trauma training. This is it. Dalton swallowed. Okay. He moved toward Bay 2 with the interns trailing like shadows. Respiratory arrived in a cluster dragging equipment. Radiology called to say CT was backed up. Blood bank said O negative was being staged, but supplies were limited. Every system in the hospital began to contract toward the emergency department like a body tensing around an injury. Emma felt the contraction inside herself too. Not panic. Something colder. A narrowing of focus. A willingness to do what needed doing without asking permission for the feelings afterward. The ambulance bay doors burst open. The first gurney came in hard, pushed by 2 paramedics moving fast enough their boots almost slipped. A medic straddled the patient, compressing his chest with brutal rhythm. The monitor attached to the gurney shrieked in a high, continuous tone. No pulse, the medic shouted. V-fib. Shocked once en route. No conversion. Cynthia stepped in and pointed. Bay 3, defib now. Keep compressions going. Emma grabbed the defibrillator cart and ran with it, wheels rattling. She positioned it at Bay 3 without thinking, hands moving with practiced familiarity. A second gurney followed a woman with glass embedded in her forearm and clavicle blood slick on her neck, eyes wide and unfocused. She was trying to speak, but couldn't pull air deep enough to form words. Her chest rose unevenly, one side lagging. A third gurney came in with a teenage boy, pale jaw, slack, shallow breaths fluttering. A paramedic held his jaw forward, trying to keep an airway open, with fingers that were beginning to tremble. A fourth gurney rolled in with a man screaming femur, bent wrong hands clawing at the rails. The hallway filled with sound. Families outside barricades, sirens fading, staff shouting orders. The building's air systems struggling under the heat of bodies and equipment. Cynthia's voice cut through. Tag them. Quick. Who is immediate? Who is delayed? A nurse slapped colored triage tags onto wrists and gowns with trembling hands. Red. 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 Yellow. Red. No greens. Emma's eyes tracked chest movement, skin color, pupil response. The subtle signs that told you when a body was about to quit. The glass-injured woman wheezed, lips tinged blue. She's crashing, a nurse said. I can't get a line. Tasha reached for the woman's arm, searching for a vein, then shook her head. They're flat. She's dry. Emma stepped in, voice calm. Femoral pulse. Tasha looked at her, annoyed. I'm trying. Emma didn't argue. She placed 2 fingers at the femoral artery. The pulse was there, but thready. The woman's neck veins bulged under strained breathing. Emma's eyes flicked to the chest. One side rose less. A tension pattern began to form in her mind, sharp and unwelcome. Cynthia pointed. Bay 1 takes glass injury. Bay 2 takes pediatric airway. Bay 4 takes ortho. Bay 3, code. Dalton moved to Bay 2, hands shaking slightly as he reached for the laryngoscope. The paramedic with the teenage boy spoke fast. He's been losing airway since scene. Possible head injury. Vomited twice. GCS dropping. Dalton tried to sound confident. "We'll intubate." His intern hovered wide-eyed. In Bay 3, the defibrillator pads were placed. The code team gathered. The medic kept compressions going. "Charge to 200, someone said. Emma's hands moved on autopilot. She could have been anywhere for all the environment mattered. A room full of alarms. A body on a table. The same instructions. "Clear," Cynthia called. The shock fired. The patient's body jumped. The monitor stuttered, then returned to chaos. V-fib persisted. "Resume compressions," Cynthia said. "Epi. Now." Emma watched the code unfold and felt the weight of time. Not in minutes. In each cycle, each attempt, each breath, the room stole from itself. In Bay 1, the glass-injured woman's oxygen saturation dropped into the 70s. "She's not ventilating," Tasha said. Breath sounds diminished on the left. A doctor from internal medicine drifted in, not a trauma surgeon, face tight with uncertainty. "Maybe asthma." Emma heard it and felt something cold. Not asthma. The woman's trachea looked slightly shifted. Her jugular veins stood out. Her chest wall moved wrong. Emma kept her mouth shut. She was transport support. She was a rookie nurse. She was not supposed to lead. The woman gagged, eyes rolling. "Bag her," Cynthia barked from across the hall. A nurse grabbed the bag valve mask and tried to seal it. The woman's chest barely rose. In Bay 2, Dalton tried to intubate the teenage boy and failed on the first pass. The boy's oxygen dropped further. His lips turned darker. Dalton swore under his breath and repositioned. Emma felt the chaos pulling the department apart. Everyone was doing something, but no one was seeing the full picture. They were fighting fires one corner at a time, while the building itself burned. Cynthia's eyes darted between bays. She was good, but she was one person. The system was cracking under volume. Emma's phone vibrated once in her pocket. She ignored it. It vibrated again. She ignored it again. In Bay 3, the code patient's rhythm changed. V-fib to asystole. "Continue compressions," Cynthia said. "Check reversible causes." Emma's hands were already moving to the crash cart, pulling needles, drawing meds, laying them out. She knew the list by memory. Hypoxia. Hypovolemia. Tension pneumothorax. Tamponade. Tension. The word pressed against her mind again, louder now, because she had seen it in 2 patients already. In Bay 1, the woman's blood pressure dropped. Tasha tried again to find a vein and failed. The internal medicine doctor looked helpless. "We need a surgeon," he said. Cynthia snapped. "We need Roe. He's not here. Do your job." The doctor flinched. In Bay 2, Dalton finally got the tube, but the boy's chest still rose unevenly. Oxygen improved slightly, then stalled. A paramedic grabbed Dalton's sleeve. His left side felt tight, the paramedic said. "We thought pneumothorax." Dalton frowned. "We don't have imaging yet." The paramedic stared at him like he had spoken a foreign language. In Bay 4, the man with the femur fracture started to lose consciousness. His screams turned into low moans. The nurse monitoring him looked up alarmed. "Pressure is dropping," she said. He could be bleeding out internally. Ortho alone was not the story. Not when blunt trauma hid everything. Emma stood at the edge of the nurse's station and felt the department approaching a tipping point. Not one dramatic crash, but a slow slide into catastrophe as decisions lagged behind physiology. Cynthia turned and locked eyes with her. Cynthia said, "Where are the trauma trays?" Emma answered immediately. "On the cart. Chest seals, decompression needles, tourniquets, pressure dressings." Cynthia nodded once. "Good. Get blood bank on the line and tell them we need more." Emma moved, but as she did, she saw Bay 1 again. The glass-injured woman's chest rose less and less. The bag valve mask met resistance. Her neck veins stood like cords. Emma felt the old rhythm start in her head, counting down. "They don't have time." She pressed 2 fingers into the inside of her wrist, a grounding pressure, and made herself keep walking. The blood bank tech answered on the first ring. "We have 4 units O negative staged. More will take time." "We don't have time," Emma said. The tech hesitated. "Who is this?" Emma swallowed. "Emergency department. We need massive transfusion protocol ready." The tech's voice sharpened. "Who authorized that?" Emma heard herself inhale slowly. Hold. Exhale. Charge Nurse Hale, she said. It was true enough. Cynthia would authorize it if she could see the need. Emma was simply making the need visible to the system. She ended the call and turned back. In the hallway, the internal medicine doctor was saying something about waiting for Dr. Rowe again. Cynthia's patience snapped. Stop saying his name like it's a prayer, she said. We are what we have. The words landed in the air like metal. Emma's stomach tightened. We are what we have. She had heard versions of that in places where hope was a luxury. In Bay 3, Cynthia leaned over the code patient, eyes scanning. The patient's chest rose slightly with bagging. Oxygenation was poor. Hypoxia and hypovolemia were obvious. But the distended neck veins were not consistent with pure blood loss. Cynthia frowned, thinking. Emma stepped closer, unable to help herself. Jugulars are distended, Emma said quietly. Cynthia looked up sharply. I see it. Emma continued, voice low. His chest wall is not moving evenly. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. She looked down again, then back up, reading Emma's face. What are you saying? Cynthia asked. Emma forced the words to stay simple. Tension pneumothorax is a reversible cause, she said. Cynthia stared for a beat, then nodded once. Needle decompression. Now. A resident reached for a needle with shaking hands. Emma's mouth went dry. She watched the resident aim too low. Her body moved before her mind made a decision. She reached out and guided the resident's hand upward, subtle, almost invisible. Second intercostal space, Emma said under her breath. Mid-clavicular. The resident looked at her, startled. Cynthia saw it. She didn't stop it. The needle went in. A hiss of air escaped loud enough to silence the room for half a second. The monitor jumped. Not fully, but enough to show a flicker of possibility. Cynthia's voice steadied. Again. Other side. Now. The resident hesitated. Emma reached for another needle without asking. She handed it over. The second hiss came out harsher, like the body had been holding its breath too long. The monitor stuttered. A rhythm tried to return. Hold compressions, Cynthia said. The medic froze, then obeyed. A pulse appeared under Cynthia's fingers, weak but real. He's back, someone whispered. Cynthia didn't celebrate. She pointed. Chest tubes. Get the tray. Move. A nurse ran. Another nurse shouted for surgery. And that was the moment the department truly realized what they had just done. Not because they saved a code. Codes happened. Not because they decompressed a chest. That was a skill. The moment was that the directive had come from the edge from a rookie nurse's quiet observation that cut through the fog. In Bay 1, the glass-injured woman's saturation dropped again. Her eyes rolled. The bag valve mask met resistance. Tasha looked toward Cynthia, voice strained. She's not moving air. Cynthia then looked back at Bay 3, caught in split attention. Dalton shouted from Bay 2. Pediatric is intubated but still desatting. The femur fracture in Bay 4 groaned and then went silent. His pressure dipped further. The department was on the brink of drowning again because they had too many emergencies at once and not enough hands with clear authority. Emma stood in the middle of the hallway and felt the decision forming inside her like a storm front. She could stay invisible and watch 3 patients die while people waited for permission, or she could step into the center and become visible in a way that would trigger consequences far beyond this hospital. Her phone vibrated again. She didn't have to look to know what it said. Do not be visible. Emma closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and saw a different corridor lit by red emergency bulbs, bodies lined up on stretchers, and a voice in her ear saying, "You are up. Vaughn, move." She opened her eyes. Cynthia was barking orders, but her voice had that edge of strain, the sound of someone spreading too thin. Emma walked to the center of the department. She did not shout. She did not perform authority. She simply spoke with a calm that made people turn. "Stop," she said. No one heard the first time. The room was too loud. Emma spoke again, same volume, different weight. "Stop." The sound in the hallway didn't vanish, but it shifted. People paused. Heads turned. Even Dalton looked up from his airway cart. Emma pointed to Bay 1. "Needle decompress her left chest now," Emma said to Tasha. "Second intercostal space mid-clavicular, then place a chest tube. She's obstructing." Tasha stared at her. Emma's eyes didn't flinch. "Do it." Tasha's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands were already moving. Emma pointed to Bay 2. Dalton, she said. If the tube is in and he's still desatting, you reassess. Check breath sounds. If one side is absent, you decompress. You do not wait for imaging while he turns blue. Dalton's face reddened. You can't tell me. Emma cut her gaze to him. You can argue, or you can save him. Dalton's jaw worked. He turned back to the boy, hands moving faster. Emma pointed to Bay 4. Femur fracture needs pelvic binder check and fast exam. Now, she said to the nurse there. He may be bleeding internally. Get blood started. 2 large bore IVs. If you can't get peripheral, go intraosseous. The nurse blinked. Intraosseous. Emma nodded. Now. The nurse moved. Cynthia stared at Emma, shock and relief wrestling on her face. Vaughn, Cynthia said, voice tight. Who told you to do this? Emma looked at her. No one. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Then why? Emma's voice stayed steady. Because we're losing them. For a beat, the department held its breath. Then the room moved. Not because they suddenly respected Emma's title, because her instructions were correct and time was bleeding out. In Bay 1, Tasha inserted the needle. Air hissed. The woman's chest rose more freely on the next bagged breath. Saturation climbed slowly like a body remembering how to live. In Bay 2, Dalton listened and heard absent breath sounds on the left. His eyes widened. He looked at the needle kit, then at the boy's monitor. He didn't ask permission. He moved. In Bay 4, the nurse slammed an IO needle into the tibia with trembling hands and connected tubing. Blood began to flow. Cynthia turned back to Bay 3, where chest tubes were finally arriving. She glanced at Emma again as if trying to reconcile the rookie badge with the command voice. Where did you learn this? Cynthia asked, not accusing now, but searching. Emma didn't answer. She grabbed a tray and ran it toward Bay 3 because the code patient still needed chest tubes and oxygen and warmth and monitoring. The emergency department surged forward, operating on borrowed seconds and newly found momentum. And somewhere outside the locked doors, sirens continued to approach because the bus crash had not finished delivering its damage yet. The second the first patient stabilized enough to move, the hospital's rhythm changed. Not calmer, not safer, but organized. The kind of organization that comes from necessity when everyone finally admits the truth out loud. They were not waiting anymore. Cynthia intercepted Emma near the trauma bay doors. Her face was tight, eyes bright with adrenaline and calculation. You just took command of my floor, Cynthia said low enough that only Emma could hear. Emma kept her voice even. I kept it from collapsing. Cynthia's nostrils flared. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might bite down on anger. Then she glanced toward Bay 1, where Tasha was bagging the glass-injured woman more easily now, oxygen saturation climbing into the 80s. Cynthia's voice dropped. How many ORs are ready? 7, Emma said, staffed, prepped, waiting. Cynthia stared at her. You know that. Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fact sat between them like a confession. A paramedic jogged up, face gray with exhaustion. We have 2 more coming. Not from the bus. Secondary collision a mile back. One with abdominal distension. One with penetrating. Cynthia swore under her breath. We do not have room. Emma's eyes tracked the paramedic's hands. The slight tremor. The knuckles white around the clipboard. Give them 5 minutes, Emma said. If we move these 3 to OR and ICU, we can open bays. Cynthia looked at her like she didn't want to accept what she was about to accept. You're saying surgery now, Cynthia said. Emma nodded. Surgery now. Cynthia lifted her radio. Or charge, this is ED. Activate disaster surgical flow. I need rooms receiving. I need anesthesia down. I need blood bank on the move. The voice that answered was strained. We are ready. We do not have Dr. Rowe. Cynthia's jaw tightened. We have people bleeding out. We are coming anyway. She ended the call and looked at Emma again. You stay near transport, like I told you. Emma met her gaze. Transport is what gets them to the table. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. And who is on the table? Emma felt the air tighten. This was the moment where a line became a door. Cynthia's voice sharpened. Vaughn, answer me. Emma spoke quietly, someone who can't wait. Cynthia held her stare. Then with the grim pragmatism of an experienced charge nurse, she made her decision. All right, Cynthia said. You are with me. You speak only to me. If legal asks questions, you let me answer. Emma nodded once. Understood. Cynthia pointed. Bay 1 to OR. Glass injury. She needs a chest tube and probably exploration for internal bleeding. Bay 2 to OR. Pediatric airway. If he's decompressed, he needs imaging and likely surgery. Bay 3 code stabilized. That one needs chest tubes and ICU. The team moved. Gurneys rolled, IV poles clattered, staff ran beside patients, squeezing bags, calling out vitals. Emma walked with Bay 1. The woman's eyes were half-open pupils darting. She tried to speak, but only air came out. Emma leaned close. You're breathing better now, she said. Keep breathing. The woman's fingers clamped weakly around Emma's sleeve, a desperate grip. Emma did not pull away. The elevators were locked for public use, but clinical access still worked. Security held the doors open as they pushed gurneys inside. The elevator smelled like alcohol wipes and stress. As the doors closed, the woman's oxygen dipped again. Tasha looked at the monitor. She's dropping. Emma glanced at the chest tube kit in the nurse's hands. Her lung is still compromised. She needs the tube now. Tasha swallowed. In the elevator, Emma's voice stayed calm. Now. Cynthia looked at Emma, then looked at the woman. Do it, Cynthia said. Tasha's hands trembled, but she moved. The elevator became a tiny operating space lit by sterile overhead panels. The doors hummed. The floor number climbed. Tasha prepped the skin on the woman's side. Emma steadied the woman's shoulder so she wouldn't twist. Cynthia watched the monitor and called out numbers with clipped focus. Sat 78, heart rate 140. Tasha made a small incision and pushed the tube in, guided by muscle memory and Emma's steady voice. Over the rib, Emma murmured, feel the pop. Tasha inhaled sharply when air and blood bubbled through the tube. The woman's chest rose fuller. Her oxygen climbed like a tide. 83, Cynthia said. 86. The elevator doors opened on the surgical floor. OR staff waited with a stretcher, eyes wide at the sight of a chest tube placed mid-transport. They pushed the patient into OR3. Inside, the operating room was bright enough to erase shadows. Surgical lights glared white. Stainless steel reflected every movement. The smell was clean and cold, but the air carried heat from bodies and machines running hard. An anesthesiologist stepped forward, mask on, eyebrows drawn tight. Who is leading? He demanded. Cynthia answered before Emma could. Trauma case. We are in disaster protocol. We are starting. The anesthesiologist's eyes flicked to Emma's rookie badge. Starting with who? Emma met his gaze. Starting with saving her. The anesthesiologist stared for a beat, then snapped into action because the monitor did not care about argument. Induction now, he called. We need airway control. A scrub tech moved instruments into place. A resident hovered at the edge, unsure whether to step in. The OR charge nurse appeared in the doorway, face tight. We have 7 rooms ready, she said. We have no attending surgeon. Cynthia's gaze snapped to Emma. Emma felt the room waiting. Not politely, desperately. The air held a single question that no one wanted to ask out loud. Who is going to cut? Emma stepped to the sink and began scrubbing. Hot water ran over her hands. Soap smell rose sharply. She scrubbed nails, wrists, forearms, every motion exact. It looked like routine. It was not routine. Inside her chest, something settled. Not confidence. A grim clarity. A narrowing of the world until it fit inside the field of view above a patient's abdomen. She finished scrubbing and turned. The tech helped her into a gown. Gloves snapped on with a tight, clean sound. Cynthia stood just outside the sterile field, eyes locked on Emma's face. You tell me right now, Cynthia said low. What are you? Emma's voice was quiet. Not who they think. Cynthia's jaw clenched, but she didn't press. She couldn't afford the answer. Answers took time. The patient's blood pressure dropped again. The anesthesiologist called out, "We are losing her." Emma stepped to the table. "Scalpel," she said. The tech hesitated for half a second, then placed it in Emma's gloved hand. Emma made the incision. Clean, decisive. Is a. No hesitation. The first cut opened skin. The second widened access. Blood welled immediately, and the suction roared to life. Pack, Emma said. Lap pads were placed. Emma's hands moved through layers the way some people moved through familiar rooms in the dark. She didn't look for permission. She looked for the source. The woman's abdomen was tense. There was free blood, not a small bleed, a fast one. Splenic injury, Emma said. A resident blinked. How do you know? Emma didn't look up. Because the left upper quadrant is full and the pressure is dropping. She reached deeper, fingers finding the spleen by touch, then the hilum. Clamp, she said. The instrument landed in her hand. She clamped the vessel and the bleeding slowed just enough to create breathing room. The anesthesiologist's voice lifted in disbelief. Pressure is coming back. Emma's tone stayed steady. We control the vessels and remove. The resident swallowed. You're doing a splenectomy. Emma didn't answer. She just worked. Suture, tie, cut, tie, cut. She ligated short gastric vessels with speed that didn't look frantic. It looked trained. Her hands moved like they belonged to someone who had closed wounds under worse lighting than this. Sweat began under her mask. The OR was hot from constant use. Her gown soaked at the collar. She didn't wipe her forehead. She didn't adjust the mask. She kept her eyes on the field. Retract, she said. The resident stepped in and held the retractor. His hands shook. Emma's did not. Breathe, Emma said to him quietly. Just hold it steady. The resident inhaled and steadied. The spleen came free. Emma lifted it dark and torn and handed it off. Irrigate, she said. Check for other bleeds. Warm saline flowed. Emma scanned methodically. She found a small bleeder near the stomach wall and sealed it. Close, she said. The resident blinked. Already. Emma's voice was calm. We have 6 more. She closed fascia with quick, precise sutures. Subcutaneous layer. Skin. The anesthesiologist called out BP 100/65. The nurse at the monitor whispered, she's stable. Emma stepped back and peeled off gloves. She didn't celebrate. She didn't look up at the stunned faces around her. She turned toward the door. Transfer to recovery, Emma said. Start antibiotics. Get labs. Monitor for bleeding. Cynthia stood in the doorway, eyes locked on Emma. You just did that, Cynthia whispered. Emma's voice came out flat. Move the next one. In the hallway. OR2 had a patient already crashing. A teenage boy with a chest decompression needle taped in place. Intubated. Pale. His oxygen saturation bobbed in the low 80s. Dalton stood outside the room, mask pulled down under his chin, eyes wild. I decompressed, he said. It helped, but he's still unstable. Emma looked at him. Where are his breath sounds? Dalton swallowed. Right side diminished now, too. Emma stepped into OR2 and washed her hands. New gown, new gloves, new field. The anesthesiologist inside OR2 looked at her, like he didn't know whether to protest or pray. Emma assessed the patient in seconds. Chest rising unevenly, neck veins still prominent. The decompression needle was too short for his body type, likely not reaching pleural space consistently. Chest tube on the left, Emma said. Now, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary. The scrub tech moved. Dalton hesitated. Emma's eyes cut to him. You started this. Don't stop now. Dalton stepped in, hands trembling. Emma guided him with short instructions. Incision. Blunt dissection. Over the rib. Tube in. Connect. The tube went in. Air and blood bubbled. Oxygen climbed. Now right side, Emma said. Dalton swallowed hard, both. Emma's voice didn't change. Both. The second tube placed. The boy's saturation rose to 92. His pressure stabilized. Emma listened to the heart. Rapid. Strained. But present. Now, she said, we check for intra-abdominal bleed. Fast exam. A tech brought the ultrasound. Emma guided the probe. Black pockets of fluid appeared. Dalton's face went pale. That's blood, Emma nodded. We open. Dalton's mouth moved. Do we have time? Emma looked at the monitor. We don't have a choice. She made the incision. Blood welled. She packed. She found the source, a mesenteric tear bleeding fast. Clamp, she said. She repaired, sutured, controlled. When she closed, the boy's vitals held steady enough to transfer. Dalton stared at Emma as if the room had become unreal. "You're not a nurse," he said quietly. Emma didn't answer. She stepped out and moved toward OR1, where the femur fracture patient had been brought in after fast scan showed pelvic fluid. Internal bleeding. Not visible. Lethal. In OR1, ortho was waiting, frustrated, focused on bone. "The leg is a disaster," the orthosurgeon said. "We need to stabilize." Emma glanced at the monitor. Pressure low. Heart rate high. Skin cool. "The leg is not the first problem," Emma said. The orthosurgeon frowned. "Excuse me." Emma held her gaze on the anesthesiologist. "He's bleeding internally. Pelvic source. We stabilize pelvis now, binder is not enough. We need hemorrhage control." The orthosurgeon's jaw tightened. "You're telling me how to run my case." Emma's voice stayed calm. "I'm telling you, he will die if you chase the bone while his abdomen fills." The anesthesiologist spoke uneasy. "BP is dropping again." The orthosurgeon looked between them, then stepped back, unwilling to fight with physiology. "Fine," he snapped. "Do what you're doing." Emma didn't correct him. She didn't need to. She opened the abdomen packed, found the bleed. Pelvic venous plexus. Messy. Hard to control. She used packing and pressure and speed, the kind that bought time for interventional radiology later, if they could get him there. She closed with temporary measures, a controlled damage control approach. "ICU," Emma said. "He needs IR when possible. Massive transfusion continues." The anesthesiologist stared at her. "How do you know damage control surgery?" Emma looked at him for a beat, eyes steady. "Because people don't always give you time for perfection." She moved on. OR4. Penetrating injury from the secondary collision. A man with a piece of metal embedded in his flank, blood pressure unstable. Emma assessed. Entry angle suggested kidney or bowel. She opened and found perforated bowel contamination beginning. She resected damaged sections, stapled, controlled contamination, irrigated, fast. She didn't do a beautiful reconstruction. She did what kept him alive. OR5. Another bus victim. Elderly woman with unstable blood pressure and suspected aortic injury. Imaging was unavailable fast enough. Emma listened, assessed, used bedside ultrasound and clinical signs. She made a call that made the room freeze. "Thoracotomy tray," she said. The scrub tech's eyes widened. "We don't have an attending." Emma's gaze didn't move. "We have a dying patient." The anesthesiologist swallowed hard. "If you open her chest, and you're wrong." Emma's voice stayed low. "If we don't, she dies." Emma opened the chest. Blood filled the field. The injury was real. The decision was correct. The work was brutal. She clamped, controlled, repaired with hands that never shook. When the bleeding slowed, the room exhaled as if it had been holding air for 10 minutes. OR6. A pediatric case, not the teenage boy, but the one the paramedics had warned them about. Small body, blunt trauma, internal bleeding suspected. The pediatric anesthesiologist arrived with a grim face. "This is a child," he said, as if it changed the physics of blood loss. Emma looked down at the child and felt her throat tighten. Children were always the hardest. Not because they bled differently, because the weight of their smallness made everything feel more violent. She kept her voice steady. "We open," she said. "We control." The pediatric surgeon on call was stuck outside the lockdown. Emma did the work herself, finding a liver laceration, controlling it with packing, and careful cautery, staying gentle, where her hands had learned to be forceful. When the child's pressure stabilized, a nurse began to cry silently behind her mask. Emma did not look at the nurse. She could not. If she looked, the thin shell of control might crack. OR7. The last of the bus crash patients, a man with severe abdominal trauma, likely splenic and bowel. Emma moved through it like she had been moving all day, as if exhaustion was something that happened to other people. She opened, packed, identified bleeds, controlled, essayed, and repaired. Closed. When she finished, the clock on the wall read 2 hours since the first incision. 2 hours of blood light suction and orders. 2 hours of becoming visible. Emma stepped back and removed her gloves. Her hands were steady. Her shoulders ached. Not a mild ache. A deep one that ran into bone, the kind that came from holding tension too long. The adrenaline began to drain out of her body, leaving behind a cold emptiness that felt like falling. She looked at the OR status board. 7 cases. 7 green indicators. 7 lines of stable vitals documented. Cynthia stood at the corridor intersection, watching Emma like she was seeing someone emerge from smoke. "You ran 7 surgeries," Cynthia said, voice hoarse. Emma nodded once. Cynthia took a step closer. "Tell me who you are." Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer was not safe. Not here. Not under cameras. Not with the city outside still locked and angry. Before Cynthia could press again, the double doors at the far end of the surgical corridor slammed open so hard they rebounded. A man burst in, coat half on, hair damp with sweat, eyes burning with fury and fear. Dr. Ethan Rowe. He stopped the moment he saw the board. His gaze moved from the green indicators to the staff standing silent, then to Emma's rookie badge, and the blood faintly visible at her cuffs. Rowe's voice dropped into something quieter than anger. "Who ran these rooms?" he asked. Dr. Ethan Rowe stood under the harsh corridor lights like a man trying to wake from a dream he did not consent to. His coat was still half on one sleeve, twisted the collar, damp, where sweat had soaked through. He looked past the staff, first looking for a familiar face, a familiar posture, a familiar authority. He did not find it. He found a board full of green. Rowe stepped closer to the surgical status screen as if proximity might change the numbers. 7 rooms, 7 completed cases, 7 timestamps that made no sense when placed beside the reality of citywide lockdown. A scrub tech shifted her weight eyes down. An anesthesiologist stared at the floor with a hollowed look that said he had been holding his breath for far too long. Dalton stood near, OR2 mask pulled down around his neck, cheeks flushed, and eyes wide as if he had just seen a storm form in a place where storms were not supposed to exist. Rowe turned slowly, scanning faces. "Who ran these rooms?" he asked again. No one answered. Rowe's jaw tightened. His gaze snapped back to the board, then to the doors of OR3, then to the staff clustered along the wall like they were waiting for a verdict. The silence wasn't defiant. It was stunned. The kind of stunned that happens when people have witnessed something they can't file into the categories they know. Cynthia Hale stepped forward because Cynthia always stepped forward. It was the only way the world made sense to her. Her shoulders squared, her voice stayed controlled. "All 7 patients are stable," Cynthia said. Rowe's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I asked." Cynthia held his gaze for a beat, then turned her head. The movement was small, almost reluctant. But it directed Rowe's attention like a spotlight. Emma Vaughn stood near the supply cart at the edge of the corridor as if she had chosen the position on purpose. Not hiding. Not advertising. Available if needed. Invisible if ignored. Her rookie badge was still clipped to her scrub top. The plastic caught the light and made the word "rookie" look like an insult. Rowe stared at it. Then he stared at her hands. They were bare now. Clean. Still. No tremor. No fidgeting. Just a quiet steadiness that did not belong to anyone 2 months into a trauma center job. Rowe's voice dropped. "That's a nurse." Emma met his gaze. Her expression didn't shift. "I know," she said. The words didn't carry bravado. They carried fact. Rowe's throat moved as he swallowed. He looked back at Cynthia. "Are you telling me," Rowe said slowly, "that while every road in this city was blocked, while we were cut off from our own chain of command, this nurse performed 7 major surgeries?" Cynthia answered without flinching, "Yes." Rowe's eyes flicked back to Emma. "Without privileges. Without authorization." Emma's voice stayed calm. "Without time." Someone inhaled sharply. A resident's eyes darted toward the administrative hallway, as if expecting security to appear and drag Emma away immediately. Rowe stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the corridor where the sterile zone began. He did not cross it. He did not need to. His stare did the work. "That's impossible," Rowe said. Emma didn't argue. She didn't defend. She simply stood there while the building absorbed what had happened. Rowe lifted his hand and rubbed it over his face, the gesture of a man trying to wipe away an image that would not leave. "Show me," he said, voice rough. "Show me the charts." A nurse handed him a tablet with fingers that shook slightly. Rowe took it and scrolled. He didn't scroll like someone looking for confirmation. He scrolled like someone looking for errors. A missed step. A complication. A bleed no one noticed. A gap in documentation. He found none. The entries were clean. Not neat in the way of a resident trying to impress. Clean in the way of someone who had done this under pressure and understood the difference between performance and survival. Ro's eyes lifted slowly. Emma's face remained unreadable. Ro spoke in a lower tone, now quieter, but more dangerous. "Where did you learn to operate like that?" Emma didn't answer immediately. Her silence wasn't theatrical. It was calculated. Cynthia watched her lips press together. Dalton watched her too, his breathing shallow. The kid wanted answers. He wanted a world where the rules were stable again. Ro waited. He did not blink. Emma finally spoke. "Previous training." Ro's eyes narrowed. "That is not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving you in the hallway," Emma said. Ro's nostrils flared irritation, fighting something else. Curiosity. Respect. Fear of what the truth might pull into the building. Cynthia stepped closer to Ro. Voice lowered. "Ethan, we can talk in an office. The patients are alive. That matters." Ro's gaze stayed fixed on Emma. "It matters how." Cynthia's tone tightened. "By any measure, that counts." Ro finally looked away, as if the effort cost him. He glanced toward the OR doors, then down the hall toward administration, where footsteps were already approaching. The hospital always moved toward noise. A group arrived like a storm front. The chief medical officer, Dr. Lillian Park, walked at the front, hair pinned back, face controlled but tense. A legal counsel trailed beside her with a folder already open. Two administrators followed with clipboards and tight smiles that never reached their eyes. They stopped when they saw Ro. Dr. Park's gaze jumped to the status board, then to Cynthia, then to Emma. She was a small woman, but the air around her carried authority. People straightened when she entered rooms. Dr. Ro Park said, "You made it." Ro's voice was clipped, barely. Park nodded toward the board. "I'm seeing completed surgeries." Ro handed her the tablet. "You're seeing miracles performed by a rookie nurse." Legal counsel's eyes widened. "That's not funny." Ro's gaze stayed cold. "I'm not joking." Park scrolled the tablet fast, her eyes sharp. The expression on her face shifted in stages. Concern, confusion, calculation. Then she looked up at Emma. "Name," Park said. Emma answered. "Emma Vaughn." Park's eyes held hers. "Are you licensed as a physician?" Emma's jaw tightened slightly. "Not in Texas." Legal counsel stepped forward, voice already sharpened. "So you are admitting you operated without credentialing?" Cynthia's head snapped toward legal. She acted in an emergency disaster context. Legal counsel's gaze flicked to Cynthia. "That does not eliminate liability." Ro's voice cut in. "Those patients would have died." Legal counsel's tone stayed smooth. "And now the hospital may die in court." Emma watched the exchange with a calm that made the lawyer's confidence look fragile. Lawyers loved rules because rules were the only thing that held back chaos. Emma looked like someone who had lived inside chaos and found rules optional. Park raised a hand, silencing legal without looking. Emma Park said, "Why didn't you disclose your background during hiring?" Emma's eyes did not drop. "Because I was hired as a nurse." Park's voice stayed even. "That doesn't answer my question." Emma's mouth went dry. She could taste the heat of the operating room still stuck in her throat. "Because my contract required it," Emma said. Ro's head snapped up. "Contract." Legal counsel's eyes narrowed. "What contract?" Emma did not respond. Park's gaze sharpened. "Contract with who?" Before Emma could decide what to do with the question, the air changed again. Not emotionally, physically. A subtle shift at the end of the corridor where an unfamiliar figure had appeared. A woman walked toward them without a badge, and without the hesitant posture of a visitor. She moved like someone who was accustomed to walking into rooms and being obeyed. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, plain clothes, no jewelry. A calm face that did not ask for permission. She stopped near Dr. Park just close enough to signal connection. "Dr. Park," the woman said quietly. Park's eyes flicked to her. "You are not on my schedule." The woman's gaze moved to Emma and stayed there. I'm here because you have an anomaly in your building. Rose's voice tightened. And you are. The woman looked at him and offered the thinnest polite smile. Dr. Mallory Quinn, she said, consulting. Legal counsel's posture shifted cautious. Consulting for whom? Quinn did not answer legal. Her eyes remained on Emma. Emma Vaughn Quinn said, as if tasting the name. 2 months on staff. Rookie designation. No privileges. And yet your technique matches a training profile I have not seen in civilian environments. Rose's eyes narrowed. What profile? Quinn glanced briefly at Park. Then back to Emma. A classified one, Quinn said. The word landed hard. Not dramatic. Heavy. It made the corridor feel smaller. Park's face tightened. Classified by whom? Quinn's voice stayed calm. Not by this hospital. Rose took a step closer. You're telling me a nurse performed 7 surgeries and your concern is paperwork. Quinn's gaze held his. My concern is that your hospital just made someone visible who was trained to remain invisible. Cynthia's shoulders stiffened. What does that mean? Quinn didn't look at Cynthia. She looked at Emma, and in her gaze there was recognition. Emma felt her stomach tighten, not from fear of getting in trouble, but from the sensation of being seen by the wrong kind of eyes. The kind that didn't admire, the kind that assessed. Quinn spoke with clinical precision. Your work today was perfect, Quinn said. Perfection triggers systems. There are cross-references for patterns of technique, documentation, style, speed, and sequence. You activated a flag. Rose's voice dropped. Flag in what system? Quinn turned slightly so Park could see her phone screen, but she didn't hand it over. She had the posture of someone who didn't relinquish control. A system most hospitals don't know exists, Quinn said. A system that monitors certain training signatures. Legal counsel's face blanched. This is absurd. Quinn's gaze snapped to legal sharp now. Absurd is watching 7 major surgeries occur under emergency conditions and believing the only risk is litigation. Legal counsel closed their mouth. Park's eyes moved between Quinn and Emma. Emma Park said, what is she talking about? Emma's voice came out quiet. I was trained. Rose's eyes narrowed. Where? Emma looked at him for a beat. She could lie. Lying was easy. She could say rural clinic volunteer work, a foreign training program. But the way Quinn watched her made it clear lies would be measured and found wanting. Emma answered with the smallest truth she could. In the army, she said. The hallway went still. Dalton's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Rose's eyes widened by a fraction. You were a combat medic. Emma shook her head. No. Rose's voice dropped. Then what? Emma held his gaze. A surgeon. The word hung like smoke. Cynthia let out a slow breath, as if her body had been holding that suspicion all day without admitting it. Park's face hardened. If you were trained as a surgeon, why are you here working as a nurse? Emma's jaw tightened. Because I was told to disappear. Rose stared. By whom? Quinn answered instead, voice calm. The unit she trained with does not exist on paper, Quinn said. Or it does not anymore. Rose's gaze snapped to Quinn. Explain that. Quinn's eyes stayed on Emma. Some units are compartmentalized. Their personnel are placed into quiet roles after service for security. Sometimes for convenience. Cynthia's voice tightened. That sounds like you're saying she's property. Quinn's face didn't change. I'm saying she is on lists that move through departments you have never heard of. Emma felt the old weight settle in her chest, the same weight she had felt the moment she read the message, telling her not to be visible. She had tried to build a life on top of that weight. A normal one. A quiet one. Today had cracked the foundation. Park's voice sharpened. Emma, are you under any obligation to an external agency? Emma did not answer. Park stepped closer. Emma. Rose's voice softened slightly, surprisingly. Tell us the truth. Emma looked at him and felt a flicker of something she didn't want. The instinct to trust a person because they were in the same line of work. The illusion that surgeons existed outside politics. It's complicated, Emma said. Legal counsel tried again, voice urgent. We need incident reports. We need statements. We need to suspend her immediately. Rose's head snapped. Suspend her. Legal counsel gestured sharply. She performed surgery without credentialing. Rose's voice rose for the first time, anger breaking through. She saved 7 people. Quinn's gaze moved to Roe, and her tone turned colder. That is precisely why this cannot be treated as a routine HR issue. Roe stared. Why? Quinn answered without softening it. Because the attention you attracted does not care that 7 people lived. It cares that a trained operator resurfaced. Cynthia's voice was tight. Operator. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. Don't call me that. Quinn's gaze met hers. I'm not trying to insult you. Emma's voice came out low. Then stop speaking like I'm an asset. Quinn held her gaze. You are not an asset to me, but someone out there will see you as one. The hospital lights flickered. Not a full blackout. Just a brief dip, like the building had taken a shallow breath and hesitated. Several staff looked up instinctively. Someone muttered, power issue. Emma felt the hair on her arms lift under her scrub sleeves. The flicker had timing. It was too clean, too deliberate. Quinn's phone buzzed. She looked down at it, and the muscles in her jaw tightened. Roe noticed. What? Quinn lifted her eyes. Your security footage has already been copied. Park's eyes widened. Copied by who? Quinn's tone stayed calm, but the words sharpened. Not by your hospital. Cynthia's face tightened. Media. Quinn shook her head slightly. Not media. Emma's mouth went dry. She didn't need Quinn to explain. She had lived long enough under quiet rules to understand who copied footage without asking. Roe's voice dropped. Then who? Quinn hesitated, then chose her words carefully. Private contractors. Third-party interests. Emma felt her chest tighten. The room seemed to narrow around her, not physically, but in the way every eye now carried a question that went beyond medicine. Park's voice steadied. Why would contractors care about a nurse? Quinn looked at Emma. Because she isn't just a nurse. Emma's fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. She forced her hands to stay at her sides. Roe spoke, voice hard. If someone is targeting my staff, I want names. Quinn's gaze stayed steady. Names are not the point. The point is that she is visible, and visibility has consequences. Emma's eyes locked on Quinn. So what? You came to scare me. Quinn's voice softened by a fraction. I came because the systems that woke up today will not stop at paperwork. Legal counsel tried again, voice strained. We need to isolate her. For the hospital. Quinn's gaze snapped to legal. Isolation is exactly what will get her hurt. Roe stared at Quinn, then at Emma. Are you in danger? Emma did not answer immediately. She felt every set of eyes on her. Cynthia's worry, Dalton's confusion, Park's control trying to hold. Emma spoke with quiet honesty. I don't know, Emma said. But I know the moment I showed what I can do, someone noticed. Quinn nodded once. Someone noticed within minutes. Park's face tightened. Emma will be placed on administrative leave pending review. Roe snapped no. Park's gaze turned sharp. Yes. This is bigger than your pride. Roe's voice cut back. This is bigger than your liability. Park's posture stiffened. It is my job to keep this institution alive. Roe's eyes flashed. It exists to keep patients alive. The corridor felt like it might split under the tension. Emma watched the argument and felt something inside her settle into cold clarity. Institutions fought for themselves. People fought for people. She had known that in war. She had hoped it would be different here. Quinn stepped closer to Park, lowering her voice. Park listened, face unreadable. Roe watched them with distrust. Cynthia turned to Emma, voice low. Emma, talk to me. Emma's gaze stayed forward. I can't. Cynthia swallowed. I'm not asking for your secrets. I'm asking if you're safe. Emma looked at Cynthia. For a moment, she let herself see the human concern there. Cynthia was hard, but she wasn't cruel. Cynthia had watched Emma today and chosen to follow because following was the only way to keep people alive. Emma answered with the smallest truth. I don't feel safe, Emma said. Cynthia's eyes softened by a fraction. Then we make you safe. Before Emma could respond, a security officer appeared at the far end of the hall. Not one of the usual hospital guards. This man's posture was different. His uniform looked similar, but his movements had a controlled economy that didn't belong to someone used to wandering corridors. Quinn noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed. She shifted her weight slightly as if placing herself between Emma and the end of the hallway without making it obvious. Ro noticed too. His surgeon's instincts read body language as well as vital signs. "That's not my security," Ro said quietly. Park's face tightened. "Who is that?" Quinn didn't look away from the officer. "That is the answer to your question about consequences." Emma felt her pulse steady, not spike. This was the calm she hated. The calm that arrived when danger became real enough to be actionable. Quinn spoke quietly to Park. "You need to move her." Park's voice lowered. "Where?" Quinn's gaze flicked to Emma. "Somewhere without cameras." Legal counsel stiffened. "Absolutely not." Quinn's eyes snapped to legal cold. "If you keep her here, you will turn your hospital into a hunting ground." Ro's jaw tightened. "You're saying someone is coming for her." Quinn's tone stayed level. "I'm saying the hospital just announced her existence to people who do not play by hospital rules." Emma looked at Ro. "You wanted the truth." Ro's gaze held hers. "Yes." Emma's voice was quiet. "The truth is, I was told not to be seen. And now I am." The unfamiliar officer in the hall moved a few steps closer, not rushing, not aggressive, just approaching like he belonged. Quinn's phone buzzed again. She glanced down, then looked up, face tightening. "We don't have time," Quinn said. Cynthia's eyes widened. "Time for what?" Quinn's gaze stayed on Emma. "Time for the hospital to decide whether it treats her like a liability or a person." Ro took a step toward Emma. "You're a person." Quinn's eyes flicked to him. "Then act like it." Ro's jaw clenched. He turned to Park. "We move her to my office. Now." Park hesitated, then nodded once, decision forced by the presence in the hallway, and the way Quinn's calm had turned sharp. Cynthia stepped in. "I'm going with her." Ro nodded. "Good." Emma didn't resist. Resistance wasted time. They moved. Not running. Running made you look guilty. They walked with purpose through a side corridor Ro knew well, away from the OR wing and toward the staff offices where the lights were dimmer and the cameras fewer. Behind them, the surgical corridor remained full of people who had just witnessed a nurse become something else and now didn't know what to call her. Inside Ro's office, the air smelled faintly of cologne and stale coffee. Books lined one shelf, trauma manuals on another. A photograph on the desk showed Ro with a team in scrubs, smiling like the world never broke. Ro closed the door. Cynthia stood near it, arms crossed tightly, eyes scanning the hallway through the glass panel. Quinn entered last and shut the blinds with a practiced motion, cutting off the view from outside. Emma stood in the center of the office, suddenly aware of how small the room was, how easily it could become a cage. Ro faced her. His voice was lower now, stripped of hallway performance. "Tell me," he said. "Who trained you?" Emma watched his face. She saw the genuine need to understand. She also saw the danger of giving him details. Details made paper trails. Paper trails made targets. She answered anyway, because the day had already torn her invisibility apart. "Forward surgical," Emma said. "Combat trauma. 8 years." Ro's eyes widened. "You were deployed." Emma nodded once. Cynthia's voice cracked, slightly disbelief showing for the first time. 8 years. "And you came here as a rookie nurse." Emma's gaze shifted to Cynthia. "It was supposed to stay buried." Ro's jaw tightened. "Why?" Emma swallowed. "Because the unit I was with does not exist. Not officially. And when it ended, we were told to disappear." Quinn watched Emma with a careful expression. "You followed the agreement." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "I complied." Quinn nodded faintly. "Different thing." Ro leaned forward, hands on the desk. "Who gave you that order?" Emma's voice went quiet. "People who don't sign their names." A beat of silence filled the office, punctuated by the distant hospital hum. Ro exhaled slowly. "You saved 7 lives today." Emma's voice stayed flat. "I did my job." Ro's eyes hardened. "No. You did something that will rip this hospital open if we don't handle it correctly." Cynthia's voice tightened. "Handle it how?" Quinn spoke first. "She cannot stay in the open." Ro's gaze snapped to Quinn. "You want me to hide her?" Quinn's tone stayed calm. "I want you to keep her alive." Ro's jaw clenched. "This is my hospital." Quinn's eyes held his. "Then protect what's inside it." Cynthia's phone buzzed. She checked it, face tightening. Legal is calling. They want her statement now. Rose shook his head. Not yet. Quinn's voice sharpened slightly. Statements can wait. Movement cannot. Emma looked at Quinn. You said you're not trying to arrest me. Quinn met her gaze. I'm trying to keep you from being collected by someone else. Rose's eyes narrowed. Collected. Quinn's expression stayed neutral. Some groups treat skilled people like resources. They will apply pressure. They will offer deals. If deals fail, they will apply other methods. Emma's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. I'm not going back. Rose stared at her. Back where? Emma's eyes flicked away. To being owned by a system that pretends it doesn't exist. Cynthia's voice lowered. Emma, are you in danger right now? Emma took a breath. Yes. Rose's posture shifted, decision forming. Then you stay with me. I don't care what Quinn says. I don't care what legal says. You stay where I can see you. Quinn's eyes narrowed. If you keep her here, you make it easy. Rose's voice sharpened. You have a better plan. Quinn looked at Emma. I do. Emma held her gaze. Say it. Quinn spoke quietly. There is an older service corridor behind ICU. Decommissioned access. No cameras. It leads to an ambulance bay that has been closed for years. If you need to leave without being tracked by hospital systems, that's the route. Rose's head snapped. Leave. You want her to run? Quinn's gaze held his. I want her to survive. Cynthia's mouth tightened. We can call the police. Quinn's voice stayed calm. The police are busy outside holding a city line. And if the people looking for her have influence, police become paperwork. Rose stared at Quinn. Who are you really? Quinn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The office felt tighter. Emma looked at Rose. You owe me nothing. Rose's voice was rough. This hospital owes you 7 lives. Emma's eyes held his. Then don't let it cost more. Rose swallowed hard. He looked at Cynthia, who looked torn, then at Quinn, whose calm suggested she had already seen outcomes like this. Rose spoke with a quiet intensity. If you leave, they win. Emma's voice stayed even. If I stay, they take you down with me. Rose's jaw clenched. I can handle pressure. Emma's eyes sharpened. This isn't pressure. This is erasure. The word landed heavy. Cynthia's breath caught. Erasure. Emma nodded once. Paperwork, career, licenses, reputation. And if that doesn't work, worse. Quinn's phone buzzed again. She glanced down and her jaw tightened. Time, Quinn said. Rose stared at her. What? Quinn's gaze moved to the office door. That officer in your hallway is not here to help you. Cynthia shifted closer to the door, listening. Footsteps passed outside. Slow, controlled. Emma's body went still in the way it always did when the moment arrived. The moment when fear became irrelevant because action was required. Rose's voice lowered. Emma. Emma looked at him. I know. Quinn stepped closer to Emma. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. If you choose to leave, you leave now. Rose's mouth opened, then closed. Cynthia's eyes shone anger and helplessness twisting together. This is insane! Emma nodded once. It is. Footsteps stopped outside the office door. A pause, then a soft knock. Not the hospital knock of a nurse asking permission. A measured knock, too polite, too controlled. Quinn's posture shifted, her calm sharpening into readiness. Cynthia's hand moved toward her radio without lifting it. Rose stared at the door, then back at Emma, and the conflict on his face looked like pain. Emma spoke quietly to Rose and Cynthia both. I didn't want this. Cynthia's voice cracked. Then why did you do it? Emma's eyes held hers. Because they were dying. The knock came again, a fraction firmer. Rose's jaw clenched. Stay behind me. Emma didn't move yet. Quinn's gaze met Emma's and held. No command. No pleading. Just a clear read of reality. Emma made her decision. She stepped toward Quinn, quiet and fast. And Quinn turned toward the back of the office, opening an interior door that led to a staff corridor most people never noticed. Cynthia started to protest, then stopped when another voice sounded outside the office. A man's voice, calm, professional. Dr. Rowe, the voice said through the door. We need to speak with your nurse. Ro's face hardened. "She's not available." A pause. Then the voice again. "This is not optional." Quinn guided Emma into the corridor. The air behind the office was cooler, dimmer, lined with storage rooms and old signage. It smelled like dust and disinfectant. Emma glanced back once. Ro stood with Cynthia in the office bodies, angled toward the door like a barricade. Cynthia's face was pale but fierce. Ro looked like a man about to start a fight he couldn't win, but would anyway. Emma's throat tightened. She turned away and followed Quinn deeper into the corridor, steps silent, breathing steady, hands controlled. They moved toward the quieter part of the hospital, where the lights were older and the walls carried the hum of machinery. Toward the service corridor behind ICU. The corridor behind Ro's office was not on any public map. It wasn't even on the newer staff maps that hung in break rooms with color-coded arrows and evacuation routes. It was an older vein in the building, built back when hospitals planned for disasters differently, and secrecy was still considered a form of security. Quinn walked ahead, her pace brisk but not frantic. Frantic drew eyes. Frantic made noise. She moved like someone who had learned that you could run without appearing to. Emma followed, keeping one hand near the seam of her scrub pocket, where her phone rested warm against her thigh. The screen was dark. It felt like a sleeping animal that could wake at any vibration. They passed a storage alcove where unused IV poles leaned against the wall like skeletal trees. They passed a locked door labeled Biomed and another labeled Maintenance Only. The lighting shifted from bright surgical white to a softer yellow that made the hallway feel older. Quinn stopped at a steel door with a faded placard that read, "Staff Access." Her fingers moved quickly over a keypad. Emma watched her hands. No hesitation. No searching. Quinn knew the code. The door clicked open and the air changed immediately. Cooler, slightly damp. It smelled like concrete and old ventilation. They stepped through. The service corridor was narrow, the ceiling lower than the main halls. Pipes ran along the top like ribs. The hum here was deeper, more mechanical. It reminded Emma of the spaces between decks on military ships where you could feel the building's heartbeat without any of its polish. Quinn didn't look back as she spoke. "Stay close. Don't touch anything you don't have to." Emma's voice was quiet. "How do you know this route?" Quinn's answer was brief. "Because hospitals have more than one kind of emergency." They moved past a junction where the corridor split. Quinn chose left without slowing. A camera housing hung in one corner, but it was empty wires cut and capped. Someone had retired it on purpose. Emma's chest tightened slightly. Not fear exactly. Recognition. This place was meant to be unseen. People didn't build unseen corridors unless they expected to need them. Quinn stopped at another door, pushed it open, and they stepped into a dim space that smelled like dust and gasoline. An old ambulance bay. The floor had faded striping. The walls carried scuff marks from gurneys that hadn't rolled through in years. A cracked sign above a closed loading door still read, "Ambulance entry," though the door itself was chained and sealed. In the center of the bay sat a dark SUV with no markings and no front plate. The engine was already running low and steady like it had been waiting. Emma stared at it. Quinn moved to the passenger door and opened it. Emma didn't get in. She stood there with the smell of exhaust in her nose and the faint vibration of the idling engine in her bones. For a moment, she wasn't in Houston. She was in another place, another life, standing at the edge of a vehicle that represented obedience or punishment, depending on who was behind the wheel. Quinn watched her expression controlled. "This is your exit." Emma's voice stayed calm, but her throat felt tight. "You planned this." Quinn didn't deny it. "I prepared for the possibility." Emma looked at the SUV, then back at Quinn. "Who is driving?" Quinn's gaze stayed steady. "Someone who gets paid to follow instructions." Emma's mouth went dry. "By whom?" Quinn's answer was quiet. "Not by me." That was not reassurance, it was honesty. Emma's pulse did not race. It steadied. The calm that arrived when the world narrowed into a single decision. A familiar calm, the one she hated, because it meant she was leaving normal life behind again. She inhaled slowly and forced her shoulders to stay loose. "What do you want?" Emma asked. Quinn's eyes held hers. "I want you alive." And I want this hospital not to become collateral. Emma let out a controlled breath. That's generous. Quinn's expression didn't change. It's practical. Emma stared at her for a beat longer, then nodded once. She climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was cold. The cabin smelled like stale air freshener and something metallic beneath it. Emma pulled the door closed softly. The sound was final. Quinn leaned in one hand braced on the door frame. Her voice dropped lower. Do not use your phone unless you have to. Quinn said, do not go back to your apartment. Do not contact anyone you care about from your usual numbers. Emma's eyes narrowed. That's an order. Quinn held her gaze. It's a warning. Emma looked forward through the windshield. The loading bay door was shut, but a smaller side exit stood open, leading to an alley behind the hospital. How do I know you're not handing me over? Emma asked. Quinn's gaze stayed steady. You don't. You make choices based on patterns. The pattern here is that someone came into your hospital asking for you like you were a piece of equipment. Emma's jaw tightened slightly. I heard him. Quinn nodded once. Then you understand. Emma looked back at Quinn. Why did you come when my name flagged? Quinn's expression softened by a fraction. Because I've read enough files to know what happens when people like you are treated like liabilities. Emma's voice was quiet. People like me. Quinn didn't answer the phrasing. You saved 7 patients. That means you did the one thing systems hate. You disrupted an expected outcome. Emma's mouth tightened. They were dying. Quinn nodded. I know. The driver shifted the SUV into gear without a word. The vehicle rolled forward slowly, tires crunching over old gravel and debris. Quinn stepped back as the SUV moved toward the alley exit. She didn't wave. She didn't offer a goodbye. She just watched, face unreadable, as if she had learned not to attach herself to outcomes she couldn't control. Emma turned her head slightly and looked at Quinn through the passenger window one last time. Quinn raised 2 fingers briefly, a small gesture that could have meant anything. Stay alive. Keep quiet. Go. Then the SUV cleared the bay and merged into the alley. The hospital fell behind them in seconds. Outside, Houston was still locked down in places. Police lights flickered at intersections. Crowds still chanted near the main roads. But in the back alleys and service streets, the city breathed differently, quieter, less watched. The SUV slipped through those veins, turning where a normal car would not. A left into a service road. A right behind a warehouse. A straight stretch under an overpass where the air smelled like damp concrete. Emma watched the side mirrors. The driver kept his eyes forward. He drove like someone who didn't want to be remembered. Emma's phone vibrated once. She didn't reach for it immediately. She listened to the vibration stop. Then she slid the phone out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. You moved. Emma stared at the words. No punctuation, no signature. Her thumb hovered. She did not type. She did not call back. She locked the screen and slid it into her pocket. Her hands stayed steady. The driver spoke for the first time, voice low. We switching cars. Emma didn't ask where. She didn't ask how many times. Her body already knew the routine. Make yourself hard to follow. Break patterns. Become a question mark. They drove for 20 minutes, then turned into the back lot of a closed auto shop. A second vehicle waited under a carport, a plain sedan with sun-faded paint. No one else in sight. The driver cut the engine. Out. Emma stepped into the open air. The lot smelled like oil and rust. Heat shimmered on the pavement even though the day had begun to cool. She moved to the sedan without hesitation. The driver handed her a small envelope through the open window. Inside were keys, cash, and a folded slip of paper with a single address written in block letters. Emma looked at it once. She didn't ask who wrote it. The driver nodded toward the sedan. That's as far as I go. Emma studied his face. He wore a cap low over his eyes. He did not look like a hero. He looked like a man doing a job. Tell Quinn. Emma said quietly, I understand. The driver didn't answer. He simply walked back to the SUV and drove away. Emma got into the sedan and sat still for a full breath, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of her own pulse under her fingertips. She looked at the address again. It was not her apartment. Not her life. Not her carefully constructed normal. She started the engine. The The sedan pulled out onto a side road and merged into evening traffic that moved in fits and starts around barricaded streets. The protest noise faded behind her. The hospital tower disappeared from view. Only then, when the building was gone, did Emma let herself think about the 7 patients, not as numbers, as faces. The woman with glass in her chest and terror in her eyes. The teenage boy whose lungs had fought her until they didn't. The child so small under the drapes that Emma's hands felt enormous. The man whose blood had pooled where life should have been. They were alive. Emma's throat tightened and she swallowed hard, forcing the feeling down before it could become something that made her lose control of the car. She drove until the city thinned into quieter streets. The address led her to a modest house near the edge of town, the kind of place you would not notice if you passed it twice. No lights on, curtains drawn, a mailbox with a common name. Emma parked down the street rather than in the driveway, habit overriding comfort. She walked to the front door, listening. No dogs barking, no footsteps, no television. Only the distant sound of traffic and the hum of an air conditioner somewhere. She tried the key. The door opened. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of clean linen. A small lamp sat on a table beside a couch. A bottle of water and a granola bar were laid out neatly, as if someone expected her to arrive hungry. Emma closed the door behind her and stood still, letting her eyes adjust. Her body searched for threats automatically. Exits. Windows. Cover. She noted a back door, a hallway, a small kitchen. She noted the lack of personal photographs. This was not a home. This was a staging point. She set the envelope on the table and sat on the edge of the couch without leaning back. Her shoulders ached now that adrenaline had drained. Her hands rested in her lap. They did not shake. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself hear the OR sounds again. The suction. The monitors. The clipped orders. The silence after a decision landed. Then she forced her eyes open because lingering in memory was dangerous. Memory could make you sloppy. Her phone vibrated again. Emma pulled it out and saw another message from the same unknown number. You made noise. You will pay for noise. Emma stared at the screen until the words felt flat and ordinary like any other text. She typed a single response. No. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Like placing a clamp on a bleeding vessel. Stop the flow. Control the damage. She set the phone down. Minutes later, a different number called. No caller ID. Emma didn't answer immediately. She listened to the ring once, twice, then picked up. A male voice spoke calm, familiar in the way threats could become familiar when you'd heard them long enough. This line isn't secure, the voice said. Emma's grip tightened slightly on the phone. Then stop calling. A pause. Then a soft exhale, almost amused, still stubborn. Emma's eyes narrowed. Who is this? The voice ignored the question. You were told not to surface. Emma's jaw tightened. 7 people were dying. The voice stayed calm. 7 people you were not authorized to save. Emma's stomach tightened with anger that felt clean and sharp. Authorized by who? Another pause. You knew the deal, the voice said. Quiet life. Quiet work. No signatures. Emma's gaze lifted to the blank wall. You don't own me. The voice didn't rise. It didn't threaten dramatically. It didn't need to. Ownership is a childish word, it said. We invested in you. We protected you. We placed you where you could live. Emma's voice went low. And stay silent. Yes, the voice said. That was the point. Emma's fingers curled around the phone. What do you want? A pause that felt like a smile. I want you to remember what happens when you make yourself a headline. Emma's chest tightened. I'm not a headline. The voice stayed calm. You are now. Your chief surgeon will talk. Administrators will panic. People will search. Emma's mind ran through Rose's face. The way he looked at the board, the anger, then the need to understand. He wouldn't mean harm, but intention didn't stop consequences. Emma swallowed. Leave them out of it. The voice softened slightly like it was amused by her hope. That depends on you. Emma's eyes sharpened. Is that a threat? The voice didn't deny it. It is reality. Emma's breathing slowed. I'm done. The voice paused. No. You are visible. And visibility has a cost. The call ended. Emma stared at the dead screen. The room was quiet again, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like the pause between strikes. She walked to the small kitchen and filled a glass with water. Her hands remained steady as she drank. The water tasted metallic, like tap water always did in unfamiliar places. She returned to the living room and looked at the lamp, the couch, the staged supplies. Quinn had helped her, but Quinn had not offered freedom. Quinn had offered time. Time to move. Time to choose. Emma looked at her phone again. No new messages. The silence was its own message. She crossed to the small desk in the corner and found a blank notepad and a pen. She wrote 3 lines in tight, controlled handwriting. 7 patients, stable, hospital compromised. I am visible. She tore the page out and folded it, sliding it into her pocket like a promise to herself. Outside, the city noise softened as the night deepened. Somewhere 7 families were hearing words they had not expected to hear. Your loved one is alive. Emma sat back down this time, leaning into the couch, slightly allowing the smallest concession to exhaustion. Her eyes closed for a few seconds. A face flashed behind her eyelids. Not a patient from today. Someone older. A memory she kept buried. She opened her eyes again and stared at the ceiling, refusing to let herself drift. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly, then faded. Emma exhaled slowly and let her mind return to one clear, grounded truth. She had saved them. That fact was real, even if everything else was about to become complicated. In a hospital office across the city, Dr. Ethan Rowe sat staring at his own phone, replaying the day's footage in his head, trying to decide which battle to fight first. And in the quiet house, Emma Vaughn sat in the dark, with her hands steady and her life unspooling into motion again, not because she wanted a fight, but because the world had brought one to her door.